The town of Red Hollow had buried Anna Calloway before she was dead. 7 men had looked her over and walked away. But the 8th man who rode in that morning didn't walk away. He stopped. And the whole town held its breath because nobody stopped for Anna Calloway anymore. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button right now and follow Anna's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1887 came down hard on Red Hollow, Montana, the way it always did, without mercy and without apology. The sun hit the packed dirt of Main Street like a hammer on an anvil by 8:30 in the morning, and by the time the settlement gathering began in the wide barn at the edge of town, the air inside was thick enough to chew. Anna Calloway stood at the far end of the line and tried not to feel the heat. She was 26 years old, and she had spent the last 3 of those years learning that a woman in Red Hollow was only worth what she could bring to a man's table. A piece of land, maybe. A father with clean hands and a clear ledger. A dowry that meant something. Or at the very least, a face that didn't remind a man of how hard the frontier could be. Anna had none of those things. What she had were hands that were rough from splitting firewood before sunrise. She had a jaw that didn't soften easy. She had a father named Thomas Calloway, who had borrowed against every acre he owned and lost the argument with the bank 2 winters ago, leaving Anna with a last name that most men in Red Hollow now associated with debt, bad luck, and failure. What she had was a cotton dress that had been washed so many times, the blue had faded to something closer to the color of old sky, and a pair of boots that had been resoled once already, and were beginning to separate again at the left toe. She stood straight anyway. That was the thing about Anna Calloway that people in Red Hollow had stopped noticing. She never stopped standing straight. Even now, with 7 other women lined up to her left, and a crowd of men working their way down the row like they were inspecting horses at auction, Anna kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and did not allow herself the luxury of looking at her own feet. The gathering was not called an auction. Nobody in Red Hollow would have used that word out loud. It was called a social or a settlement meeting, or simply the summer gathering, depending on who was talking about it. But everyone understood what it was. It was the annual ritual by which unattached women of marriageable age were made available for consideration by men who needed a wife to help run a homestead, a business, or a household. The women stood. The men evaluated. Arrangements were made, or they weren't. It had been going on for 15 years. Anna had been standing in this barn for the 3rd time, the first time she'd had hope. She'd been 23, and her father's debts were still a private matter, and she'd worn a dress that was actually blue instead of the memory of blue. A man named Gerald Hutchins had talked to her for a full 10 minutes that day. He'd asked about her cooking. He'd seemed interested. He'd moved on down the line and chosen a girl named Bertie Oakes, who had a father with 40 head of cattle and a well that hadn't run dry in a decade. Anna had understood. The second time, the debts were public. A man named Roy Fenwick had looked at her the way you look at a door that's been painted over one too many times, not with cruelty exactly, but with a kind of tired assessment that ended in the decision not to bother. He hadn't spoken a word to her. He'd just moved on. This was the 3rd time. Anna knew, standing there in the heat of that barn, with sweat collecting at the back of her neck, that there would probably not be a 4th time. Not because she'd made peace with being alone, she hadn't, not entirely, but because she was beginning to understand that Red Hollow had already written her story. And it was a short one, and it ended with a woman working herself down to bone and sinew, keeping her father's broken homestead alive until neither of them had anything left. She knew this. She stood straight anyway. The men came down the line. First was a rancher named Dale Pruitt, thick across the shoulders, with a wife already in her grave from a fever 3 winters back, and 4 children who needed a woman to run his house. He was not unkind exactly. He stopped in front of each woman and said something brief and direct, asking about experience with children, or cooking, or livestock. When he got to Anna, he looked at her for about 4 seconds. His eyes went to her hands. Everyone's eyes always went to her hands, and then he looked at her dress, and then at something just past her shoulder, like he was already calculating the distance to the next woman in line. He moved on without speaking. Anna breathed. Next was a younger man, maybe 22, who had recently inherited his uncle's claim up near the North Ridge. He was nervous and kept touching the brim of his hat. He got to Anna and opened his mouth and then closed it again, and the man standing behind him, an older fellow named Amos Green, who ran the feed store, leaned in and said something quiet near the young man's ear, and the young man's expression shifted, and he moved on. Anna had heard enough of those quiet conversations over the years to know what had been said. That one's Thomas Calloway's girl. The bankrupt. Don't bother. Third, fourth, fifth. Each one a variation on the same story. A glance, a calculation, a decision made in the space of a heartbeat. Some of them were courteous about it. A small nod, a tip of the hat, a half-apologetic look that said, "It's not personal, it's practical." Some of them weren't courteous at all. The sixth man was a fellow named Harlan Cross, who ran a cattle operation about 12 miles south of town, and had money enough that he could afford to be openly rude. He stopped in front of Anna and looked at her the way a man looks at something he's trying to decide whether to throw out or leave on the road for someone else to deal with. "Thomas Calloway's daughter," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir," Anna said. "Your daddy owes the First Territorial Bank $1,100, Harlan said. "That debt ride with you?" "I don't have anything to do with my father's debts," Anna said. "I'm not the one who signed those papers." Harlan Cross smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "No, but you're the one carrying his name, and out here that's the same thing." He moved on. The seventh man was worse because the seventh man had an audience. His name was Buck Whitfield, and he was 40 years old, and he was the kind of man who had been good-looking once and had never stopped behaving like he still was. He had money from timber contracts and a house on the good side of Main Street, and an opinion of himself that could fill a room before he walked into it. He had already turned down 3 of the other women in the line, and each time he'd done it with a small performance that got a reaction from the men standing around a raised eyebrow. Here, a shrug, there, a comment delivered just loud enough to land. When he got to Anna, he stopped and put his hands on his hips and tilted his head like he was studying a painting that wasn't quite right. "Anna Calloway," he said. "Mr. Whitfield." "You know," he said loud enough that the men nearest him could hear, "I've been trying to think of what you remind me of, and I just figured it out." He paused for effect. "You look like work, and I've already got plenty of that." The laughter was not from everyone, but it was from enough. Anna felt the sound of it like something physical, not in her chest, where she might have expected it, but lower somewhere in the stomach, the way a cold wind hits you when you're already tired, and the cabin is still far off, and you're not sure you've got enough left to make it. She did not react. She kept her face still, the way her mother had taught her back when her mother was alive, and there were still things worth protecting. She did not look down. She did not let her jaw move. But she felt something shift inside her. Something very quiet and very final. Like a door closing on a room you'd been standing in so long you'd stopped noticing the walls. Buck Whitfield moved on. Anna Calloway was still standing in the line, but she understood now completely, and without any remaining shadow of doubt, that she was invisible. Not cruel invisible, not deliberately excluded invisible. Just erased. The way something gets erased when enough time passes and enough people stop looking at it. She had become part of the furniture of Red Hollow's failure stories, a cautionary detail. A footnote, a woman that respectable men pointed away from when they were teaching their sons about the importance of choosing well. The gathering moved on around her. Conversations started. 2 of the other women were already in negotiations with men who'd approached them. Somewhere near the barn door, somebody laughed again at something that had nothing to do with Anna Calloway, but she flinched anyway, because her nerves were running close to the surface now, and she couldn't entirely help it. Her younger sister May was standing near the water barrel with their father. May was 19, and had their mother's coloring, and had not yet been crushed by the weight of the Calloway name the way Anna had, because she was still young enough that men were willing to overlook the debt on the hope that she'd grow into something worth the risk. May caught Anna's eye across the barn and looked away. Not out of malice, out of the particular shame that comes from watching someone you love be humiliated in public and being unable to do a single thing about it. Thomas Calloway did not look at Anna at all. He was talking to a man Anna didn't recognize, gesturing with the nervous energy of a man trying to make a deal he had no leverage for. Anna watched him from across the barn and felt something old and tired move through her. Not anger exactly, more like the aftermath of anger, the hollow place that gets left when you've been angry about something for so long that the feeling has burned itself out and left nothing but ash. She had loved her father once the way children love their fathers, without condition and without accounting. She still loved him, probably in some residual way that lived below thought. But she had stopped trusting him about 2 years ago, and she had stopped expecting anything from him about 6 months after that. And now, when she looked at him, she mostly felt a kind of exhausted recognition, the way you feel looking at a road you've walked too many times. She turned away. She was heading toward the side door of the barn, not running, not making a scene, just removing herself quietly, the way she'd gotten good at doing, when she heard the main door bang open hard. The sound cut through the noise of the gathering, the way a gunshot cuts through conversation, sudden and total. Every head in the barn turned. The man in the doorway was not from Red Hollow. Anna knew that immediately, the way you know certain things without being able to explain the knowing. It wasn't just that she didn't recognize his face, it was the way he stood. Men from Red Hollow stood in doorways, the way they stood everywhere, like they were calculating what the space owed them. This man stood in the doorway, the way a rock stands in a river. Like the doorway had accommodated itself to him, and not the other way around. He was tall, not theatrically tall, but the kind of tall that only becomes visible when he moved, and you realized he'd been taking up more space than you'd accounted for. He was wearing trail dust like it was a second coat, and there was a dark stain on his left sleeve that had dried to rust brown, and he was carrying a pack that looked like it weighed as much as a small man, and he did not appear to notice any of this, or to find any of it remarkable. His name, Anna would learn later, was Cole Maddox. But in that moment, standing at the side door of the barn with her hand on the latch and the summer heat pressing down on the tin roof overhead, she didn't know his name. She just watched him, the way everyone in that barn was watching him, with a kind of arrested attention. The particular alertness that happens when something enters a room that doesn't belong to the room's usual logic. Cole Maddox looked at the gathering. He took it in the way a man takes in terrain, systematically, without visible emotion, working from one end to the other. His eyes moved down the line of women still standing near the far wall. He passed over the first woman, the second, the third and fourth and fifth. He stopped at Anna. Not paused. Stopped. The distinction mattered. A pause is a hesitation, a moment of uncertainty before a decision. What Cole Maddox did was different. It was the stopping of a man who has found the specific thing he came looking for and is now confirming what he already knew. Anna's hand was still on the latch. She had no idea what her face was doing. Cole Maddox crossed the barn. He did not cross it quickly, and he did not cross it with any particular display of purpose. He just walked toward her the way a man walks toward the place he intends to be steady and unhurried and completely inevitable, and the crowd parted for him the way crowds part for men who are not asking permission. He stopped about 3 feet in front of her. Up close, he was older than she'd thought. At the door, closer to mid-30s, with the kind of face that the mountain produces in men who spend years exposed to wind and altitude and silence. Lines at the corners of his eyes. A jaw that hadn't seen a razor in at least a week. Eyes that were a dark gray-green, the color of sage after rain, and that were looking at her now with an attention so direct and unambiguous that Anna felt the strange and unfamiliar sensation of being seen, not evaluated, not assessed for value or liability or potential return on investment. Seen. "You're leaving?" he said. His voice was low, the kind of voice that had gotten used to competing with wind. "I was," Anna said. "Don't." He said it without inflection. Not a command exactly, more like information. Anna stared at him. Around them the barn had gone quiet in the particular way that barns go quiet when something unexpected is happening, and everyone wants to watch, but no one wants to be the one who breaks the silence. She could feel Buck Whitfield watching from somewhere to her left. She could feel Harlan Cross. She could feel the weight of Red Hollow's judgment like a physical thing pressing against the space between herself and this man she'd never seen before. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then why—" "I've been watching this room for about 4 minutes," Cole Maddox said. "And in those 4 minutes, I've seen 7 men make the same mistake." Anna felt something change in her chest. Something careful. "What mistake is that?" He looked at her hands, the same way all the other men had looked at her hands, but completely differently, the way a carpenter looks at good wood and a man who doesn't know anything about building looks at the same wood and sees only roughness. "They were looking for something easy," he said. "I'm not." The silence in the barn had reached a pitch that Anna could almost hear as sound. She was aware of her father across the room finally looking at her. She was aware of May. She was aware of Buck Whitfield's expression, which had shifted from amusement to something considerably less comfortable. She was most aware of Cole Maddox standing in front of her dusty and blood-stained and direct with a pack on his back that suggested he had not come to Red Hollow to stay. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked. "A partner," he said. "Not a decoration, not a name with clean paper behind it, not someone who can sit pretty in a parlor in town." He paused. "I live above the timberline. I come down twice a year. I need someone who can work, who doesn't break when the mountain decides to test her, who can look at something hard and not look away from it." "That's not what most men want," Anna said carefully. "I'm not most men," Cole said. There was no arrogance in it, just the flat, simple truth of a man who had stopped comparing himself to the standard a long time ago, because the standard had nothing to do with the life he was living. Anna looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the summer wind was picking up, rattling the boards on the east side of the barn, and the dust it carried was visible even through the gaps in the siding, pale and constant. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know you stood in that line for 3 hours and 7 men walked past you, and you didn't cry," Cole said. "I know you were leaving through the side door because you didn't want anyone to see you go. I know your hands tell me you've been keeping something alive through hard work for a long time. And I know—" He paused, and something shifted almost imperceptibly in that weathered face, something careful and honest, "that you're still standing straight." Anna Calloway had been holding herself together for the better part of 3 years. She had held herself together through the bank notices and the whispered conversations and the pitying looks and the slow erosion of everything her family had once been. She had held herself together through 2 gatherings and 7 rejections, and Harlan Cross's accounting of her father's debts and Buck Whitfield's performance for his audience. She had gotten very good at holding herself together. She held herself together now. But it cost her something. She felt it cost her something standing there looking at this man she didn't know who had crossed a room full of people to tell her that what they had all seen as her deficiency was the thing he'd come looking for. "I don't know anything about the mountain," she said. Her voice was level. "I can teach you what you need," Cole said. "The rest you already have." From across the barn, Buck Whitfield called out loud enough for the room to hear, "Maddox, you sure about that? That's Thomas Calloway's girl. Comes with a debt attached." Cole did not turn around. His eyes stayed on Anna. "The debt's not hers," he said. "The name is," Whitfield said. "The name's what she was given," Cole said. "Not what she is." Now he did turn just far enough to look at Whitfield over his shoulder, and there was something in that look that made Whitfield stop talking. Not fear exactly. Whitfield was not the kind of man who frightened easily, but the particular stillness of a man who has decided not to say the next thing because the look he'd received suggested that the next thing would not be worth the cost. Cole turned back to Anna. "You don't have to say yes," he said quietly. "If you walk out that side door right now, I won't follow you. But I'm asking." Anna looked at the door. She looked at the barn at her father, who was still watching with an expression she couldn't read from across the room. At May, who looked like she was trying to decide whether to be afraid or something else entirely. At the faces of the men who had passed her over, several of whom were watching this exchange with the specific attention of people watching something they don't know how to categorize. She looked back at Cole Maddox. "What would I be walking into?" she asked. "Hard work," he said without hesitation. "Cold nights even in summer above the tree line. A cabin that's functional but not comfortable. Months at a stretch without seeing another human face." He paused. "And a man who means what he says." "That's a short list of promises," Anna said. "It's an honest one." She was quiet for a long moment. The wind hit the barn again harder this time, and somewhere overhead a board groaned under it. "I need to speak to my father," she said finally. Something crossed Cole's face, not relief, because she hadn't said yes yet, but a kind of settling, like a man who has made his case and is prepared to stand by it. He nodded once. "I'll be outside," he said. He turned and walked back toward the main door, and the crowd parted for him again, and Anna watched him go with the particular attention of someone who is trying to memorize something before it disappears. Then she crossed the barn toward her father, and the eyes of Red Hollow followed her, and for the first time in 3 years, Anna Calloway did not feel invisible. She felt like the beginning of something. She just didn't know yet whether the something was hope or the last dangerous kind of recklessness that looks exactly like hope from the inside. She pushed through the small crowd toward her father. Whatever came next, she was going to meet it with her chin level and her boots on solid ground. That was all she had ever known how to do, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like it might actually be enough. Thomas Calloway did not look like a man who was surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for something to go wrong and was still deciding whether this counted. Anna reached him near the water barrel and stopped close enough that she didn't have to raise her voice above the noise of the barn, which had started filling back up with conversation now that the spectacle had moved toward its apparent conclusion. Her father's eyes moved past her shoulder toward the door where Cole Maddox had disappeared, and then came back to her face with the cautious expression of a man trying to calculate odds on a bet he hadn't placed yet. "Who is he?" Thomas asked. "His name is Cole Maddox," Anna said. "He lives above the timberline. He comes down twice a year." "I know who Cole Maddox is," her father said, and something in his voice shifted. Not fear, but the particular unease of a man who has heard a name spoken in a certain tone enough times to know what comes attached to it. "What I'm asking is what he said to you." "He asked me to go back up the mountain with him," Anna said. "As a partner." Thomas Calloway was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands, which were the hands of a man who had once worked hard and now worked at the appearance of working hard, calloused in the old places, but soft in the new ones. "Anna." "7 men walked past me today, Papa," she said, not angrily, just clearly. "The way you state a fact that has stopped hurting because it has been a fact long enough. 7. And you watched all 7 of them do it, and you didn't say a word to any of them. I was going to speak to Gerald Hutchins after. Gerald Hutchins is already talking to Margaret Fife, and she has 80 acres and a clear deed, and you know it." She kept her voice level. "What I'm asking you is whether you have any reason, any real reason, that I should say no to Cole Maddox." Her father looked at her for a long time, and in that look she could see all of it. The guilt he carried like a stone in his chest, the debts, the years, the slow collapse of everything he'd promised her mother he would build. She could see him looking for something to offer her, and coming up empty in the way he'd been coming up empty for the better part of 3 years. "He's a hard man," Thomas said finally. "People say he's been alone so long he's forgotten how to be anything else." "People in this town say a lot of things," Anna said. "Anna!" Her father's voice dropped. "The mountain is no place for—" "For what?" she said quietly. "For a woman that nobody here wants." The words landed. She hadn't meant them to land quite that hard, but they did, and she watched her father absorb them the way a man absorbs a blow he knows he deserves. Across the barn, she could hear Buck Whitfield's voice rising again, telling some version of what had just happened to a group of men near the far wall. She caught her own name in it. She caught the word Calloway spoken the way you say a word that tastes bad. She looked back at her father. "I'm going to talk to him," she said. "That's all I'm saying I'm going to do." Thomas Calloway nodded once slowly with the exhausted look of a man who has run out of arguments and knows it. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then, in a voice so quiet she almost missed it under the noise of the barn, he said, "Your mother would have said go." Anna held that for a moment. Then she turned and walked toward the main door. The sun outside hit her like a wall. After the dim interior of the barn, the brightness was almost violent, and she stopped for a moment just outside the door, letting her eyes adjust, and that was when she heard the voice to her left. "He's not what you think he is." She turned. An older woman was standing near the corner of the barn, in the thin strip of shade thrown by the eave, with a basket on her arm, and the expression of someone who has been watching events unfold for a long time, and has opinions about all of them. Her name was Ruth Garner, and she ran the dry goods store on the north side of Main Street, and she was one of the approximately 4 people in Red Hollow who had never been unkind to Anna, which gave her words a weight they might not have carried coming from someone else. "What do I think he is?" Anna asked. "Lost," Ruth said. "You think he's dangerous. Most people in this town do. But that's not the same thing as lost." She shifted the basket on her arm. "He came down from that mountain 2 years ago with a man who'd broken his leg on a rock slide. Carried him 6 miles on his back. Didn't ask for anything for it. Just left the man at Doc Henley's door and went back up." She paused. "A dangerous man doesn't do that." "A lost man might," Anna said. Ruth looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Maybe. But a lost man can be found if the right person's willing to do the looking." She turned back toward the store. "That's all I'm saying." Anna watched her go. Then she looked down the street and found Cole Maddox standing at the hitching post in front of the feed store, loading something into his pack, with the efficient movements of a man who does not waste motion. His horse, a big gray with the kind of deep chest that meant mountain endurance, stood motionless beside him, reins loose, not tied. The horse didn't need tying. That said something. She walked toward him. He heard her coming and straightened without turning, which meant he'd been aware of her the moment she stepped out of the barn door. When she got close enough, he turned and looked at her with that same direct, unambiguous attention he'd crossed the barn with 40 minutes ago. "What happened to your arm?" Anna asked, nodding at the dried stain on his sleeve. "Caught a trap edge on the way down," he said. "It's not deep." "You cleaned it." "Well enough." "Let me see it." He looked at her for a beat, and she could see the reflexive resistance of a man who was not accustomed to being looked after. Then, without comment, he pushed his sleeve up to the elbow. The cut was about 3 inches long, running along the outside of his forearm. It had stopped bleeding, but it hadn't been cleaned properly. There was still dirt in the edges, and the skin around it was beginning to show the first faint signs of heat. "That needs to be washed properly," Anna said. "I'll deal with it up top." "That's 2 days' ride," she said. "That'll be infected by morning." She turned toward the general store across the street. "Come with me." She heard him hesitate, a single beat of hesitation, which was probably the closest Cole Maddox came to being visibly uncertain, and then she heard his boots on the dirt behind her. Ruth Garner looked up when they came through the door and did not appear surprised. She set a basin on the counter without being asked and went to the back for carbolic and clean cloth. Anna washed the cut. Cole sat on the edge of the counter and let her watching her face with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not discomfort, not gratitude exactly, something more careful than either of those things. "You didn't give me an answer," he said. "I know," Anna said. She worked the cloth along the edge of the cut, cleaning out the dirt methodically. "I'm thinking." "What's there to think about?" he asked, not pressuring, genuinely asking the way a person asks when they are trying to understand the logic of a situation. "I've never been above the timberline," she said. "I don't know what I don't know up there. A person should know what they're walking into." "I told you what you're walking into. You told me the conditions," Anna said. "Hard work, cold nights, long stretches without other people. That's conditions. That's not the same as knowing." Cole was quiet for a moment. She could feel him thinking, which was different from most men who were quiet when they had nothing to say, and loud when they did. Cole Maddox was quiet in the way of a man who was turning something over carefully before he committed to it. "Ask me what you want to know," he said. She tied off the cloth bandage and looked up at him. "Why do you live alone up there?" "Because it makes sense," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the honest one," he said. "I was down here for a while. Tried it, the town way." A pause. "It didn't suit me." "What does that mean?" "It means I kept watching people do things that made no sense to me and being told I was the one who was wrong," he said flatly. "At least the mountain makes sense. What you put in, you get back. No politics, no performance. No pretending something is worth more than it is because enough people decided it was." Anna looked at him steadily. "And you think I fit that kind of life?" "I think you're already living it," he said, "just in the wrong place." That landed somewhere she hadn't expected. She took a breath and looked away, straightening the cloth and the carbolic on the counter with unnecessary care, giving herself a moment to make sure her face was doing what she wanted it to do. "I've got a father with debts and a sister who isn't old enough to manage on her own, yet," she said. "The sister's 19, Cole said. Anna looked at him sharply. "How do you know that?" "Asked around while you were inside talking to your father," he said. There was nothing casual about it. It had been deliberate, systematic, the way a man gathers information before he makes a decision. "She's old enough, and your father's debts aren't going to be paid whether you stay or go. You staying doesn't fix what he broke." It was blunt. It was also true. She had known it for months, probably longer, but hearing it said plainly by someone who had no stake in softening it hit differently than knowing it in the quiet of her own mind. "You did your research," she said. "I don't make decisions without information," he said. "And based on your information," she said slowly, "you decided I was worth crossing a room for." "Based on my information," he said, "and on watching you stand in that line for 3 hours and not once let any of those men see what it cost you." He held her gaze. "Yeah, I decided." The store was quiet. Somewhere outside, the wind moved through Main Street and lifted a small cloud of summer dust past the window. Anna Calloway made a decision. She would think about it later, what made her say yes in that moment, in that store, to that man. She would think about whether it was desperation dressed as courage or something cleaner than that. But in the moment, she wasn't thinking about any of it. She was just looking at Cole Maddox's face, which was weathered and direct and entirely free of the performance that coated almost every other human interaction she'd had in the last 3 years, and she was feeling something she had almost forgotten the shape of. The feeling of being taken seriously. "I'll need a day," she said, "to get my things and speak to May." Cole nodded. "I'm camped north of town by the creek bend. I leave at first light day after tomorrow." He paused. "If you're not there, I'll understand." "If I'm not there," Anna said. "It won't be because I was afraid." Something moved at the edge of his expression. Not quite a smile more, the precursor to the small shift that happens in a face before the face commits to the full thing. "I know," he said. He slid off the counter and pulled his sleeve down over the bandaged arm and picked up his pack from beside the door. At the threshold he stopped, not turning around. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Anna," she said. A brief pause. "Anna." He walked out into the summer heat, and she watched him go, and Ruth Garner came out from the back room with an expression that suggested she had heard every word. "Well," Ruth said. "Don't," Anna said. Ruth pressed her lips together in a way that was trying hard not to be a smile. Wasn't going to say a word. Anna smoothed her dress and walked back out into the afternoon. The next 20 hours were the longest of her life, and also in a strange way, the most clarifying. She went home, and she told May. May sat on the edge of the bed they had shared since childhood, and listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Anna knew her sister understood the weight of it. When she finished, May was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the summer evening was turning the sky over the ridge a deep burnt orange, and the heat of the day was finally beginning to break, and somewhere down the road, a neighbor's dog was barking at something that may or may not have existed. "Are you scared?" May asked finally. "Yes," Anna said. It was the most honest thing she'd said all day. "But you're going." "I think so." "Because of him?" May asked carefully. "Or because of here?" Anna thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. "Both," she said finally. "But mostly because of here. Because I've been waiting for something to change, and it isn't going to change. Not for me. Not in this town." She paused. "And because he looked at me like I was the obvious choice." May was quiet again. Then she said in a smaller voice, "What do I do if Papa gets worse?" "You write to Aunt Helen in Billings," Anna said. "She's been asking you to come for 2 years. You go." She reached across the bed and took her sister's hand. "You don't owe this place anything more than I do." May's jaw tightened in the way it always did when she was holding something back. "I hate that you're right," she said. "I know. I hate him a little bit," May said. "For putting us here." "I know that too," Anna said. They sat there in the fading light for a while, holding hands on the edge of the bed, two sisters on the last night of the life they had known. Anna thought about their mother, who had been practical and unsentimental, and had cried exactly once in Anna's memory at their grandmother's funeral, and who had told her daughters on separate occasions, and in slightly different words, the same essential thing. Don't wait for someone to tell you your value. Know it yourself, and walk accordingly. Anna thought she understood that better tonight than she ever had before. Her father did not come home until after dark. She heard him on the porch and went out, and they stood in the warm night air, and he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since she was a child, with a love that was genuine, and a failure that was equally genuine, and the perpetual collision of the two that had defined their relationship for years. "You've decided," he said. "Yes," he nodded. He didn't argue. Maybe he had run out of arguments, or maybe, and this was the thought that would sit with her for a long time after maybe he understood on some level, below justification, that he had made this decision inevitable and that arguing against the consequence of his own choices was more than he could stand to do. "Maddox is a serious man," Thomas said finally. "I know. He won't make it easy. I know that too. Anna." He stopped. He pressed his lips together and looked at the dark ridgeline against the night sky, and she could see him trying to find words for something that lived below the reach of his usual vocabulary. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "I know that doesn't—" He stopped again. "I know it doesn't fix anything." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." But she put her hand on his arm briefly, just for a moment, and then went back inside. She packed before dawn. 1 bag. The practical things, 2 changes of clothing, her mother's small knife that lived in the bottom of the trunk, the piece of oilcloth she used in wet weather, the medical kit she'd put together 2 winters ago, when the doctor was snowed out for 6 weeks and someone needed to be able to close a wound. She was not a sentimental packer. She had learned that sentiment in a bag just slows you down. May was awake when she left. She stood in the doorway in the gray pre-dawn, and they looked at each other for a long moment, and then hugged hard and brief the way people hug when they know that prolonging it won't make it easier. "Write to me," May said. "When I can get a letter out," Anna said. "Twice a year." May laughed one sharp short sound. "Lord." "Write to Aunt Helen," Anna said. "Promise me." "I promise," May said. Anna walked. The road north of town was empty at that hour, and the air was cool, the way summer air is only cool in the very early morning before the day remembers what it's supposed to be doing. Her boots found the ground steadily one after another, and she did not look back at the house, and she did not allow herself to catalog what she was leaving because that accounting would only be useful if she was considering turning around, and she wasn't. She found Cole Maddox at the creek bend exactly where he'd said he'd be. His camp was minimal a bedroll, a fire that had been reduced to coals, his horse standing in the same unconcerned way she'd stood in town. He was crouched by the coals with a tin cup when she came through the brush, and he looked up at her with an expression that she would come to recognize over the weeks ahead as his version of relief, understated, brief, but real. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she said. "I'm always early." He stood and held out the cup. "Coffee." She took it. It was strong enough to strip paint, and she drank it anyway, standing at the edge of his camp in the pre-dawn gray with her bag at her feet and the mountain invisible above them in the dark waiting. "How far?" she asked. 3 days' ride to the upper camp," he said. "Longer if the weather shifts." "What do I need to know before we go?" He looked at her with that particular attention of his. "You'll ask questions when you need to. I'll answer them. We'll be fine." It was not by any reasonable measure a reassuring statement, but it was honest, and Anna had decided somewhere in the last 24 hours that honesty was the quality she was going to value above all others going forward, because it was the quality that Red Hollow had been most stingy with for most of her life. They broke camp in 20 minutes. She watched how he did it, efficient, ordered no movement wasted, and filed it away. When he offered his hand to help her mount the second horse, a sturdy bay that had been tied in the trees, she took it without comment. They rode north as the sky began to lighten. Neither of them spoke for a long while, which should have been uncomfortable, and wasn't. The trail climbed gradually through the lower foothills, and the air changed as they rose, cooling and sharpening, losing the flat, dusty quality of the valley floor, and Anna felt it in her lungs. First, that first clean hit of mountain air, and then, in her spine, a particular straightening, as if her body was responding to something it recognized, even if she didn't. About an hour out, with the sun beginning to work over the eastern ridge, Cole said without looking at her, "You did something back there that I want to mention." "What's that?" "You cleaned my arm before you gave me an answer," he said. "Before you knew whether you were coming or not." A pause. "Most people, they'd have used that as a negotiating point, made it a gesture of goodwill toward the deal." "It wasn't a gesture," Anna said. "It was infected." "I know," he said. "That's the point." She looked at him sidelong. He was watching the trail ahead, but there was something in his profile and the set of his jaw, and the quiet attention of it, that told her this had mattered to him more than he would probably ever say directly. "You're going to have to get used to the fact that I just do things," Anna said. "I don't do them to make a point. I don't do them to accumulate credit. I just do what needs doing." "I know," he said again. "You say that a lot," she said. "Because I mean it each time," he said. They rode on. The mountain rose ahead of them, vast and indifferent, and utterly indifferent to everything that had happened in Red Hollow in the past 3 years, and Anna Calloway rode toward it with one bag on her back, and a man she barely knew ahead of her on the trail, and the absolute crystalline, slightly terrifying sense that her life had just turned a corner. It was never going to turn back from. She was not sure if she was ready. She rode forward anyway. And somewhere behind her, in the slow-waking town of Red Hollow, Buck Whitfield was already telling a version of what had happened in the barn, a version in which the story ended with Thomas Calloway's ruined daughter making a desperate bargain with a mountain hermit, which proved, didn't it, everything he'd ever said about the Calloway family and the inevitable end of people who had nothing worth offering. He was wrong about the ending, but he didn't know that yet. They reached the upper camp on the evening of the 3rd day, and by the time Anna swung down from the bay and her boots hit the ground at altitude, her legs were shaking in a way she had not expected and would not have admitted to anyone. Cole didn't comment on it. He took the horse's reins and let her find her footing without making it a moment which she appreciated more than she could have said. The cabin was exactly what he had promised. Functional, not comfortable. 4 walls of stacked timber with a single window facing east, a door that swung on heavy iron hinges, a stone fireplace that took up most of the north wall, and a floor of packed earth covered in places with rough-cut boards. There was a sleeping loft above the main room accessible by a ladder. There was a line of iron, a work table. There was a line of iron hooks on the wall beside the door, bearing items whose purposes she would learn over the coming days. Coiled rope, a small axe, a canvas pack, a pair of heavy gloves with the fingers worn down to bare thread at the tips. It was nothing like any home she had known. She stood in the middle of it and breathed the cold pine-sharp air and felt the altitude in her chest, like a hand pressing gently inward, and she thought, this is real now. Not the barn in Red Hollow, not the decision, not the writing. This specific room, this specific silence, this specific distance from everything she had known, this was real. Loft's yours, Cole said behind her, setting her bag inside the door. I sleep down here by the fire. You don't have to. It makes sense, he said. You'll be warmer up top. Heat rises. It was practical, and it was also, she realized, a form of consideration that had no performance in it. He wasn't making a show of the gesture. He was just solving the problem of her comfort the most logical way he could. Thank you, she said. He nodded and went back out to see to the horses, and Anna Calloway stood alone in her new home and held herself together for the 4th time in 4 days, which was becoming something of a habit. She did not cry. She put her bag in the loft and came back down and found the woodpile and brought in 3 armloads without being asked. And when Cole came back in and found her building the fire, he looked at her for a moment and then went to the supply shelf and started on supper without a word. That was the first night. The first week was a reckoning. Anna had believed herself capable. She was capable. She knew that it was not arrogance. It was the plain accounting of a woman who had kept a homestead running for 3 years on her own. But capable in the valley and capable above the timberline were 2 different species of the same word, and she discovered the distance between them in increments across those first 7 days that were each in their own way a small humiliation she refused to show. The altitude hit her first. Not dramatically, she didn't fall, didn't lose consciousness, nothing that Cole would have needed to manage. It was subtler than that. A persistent dullness at the back of her skull. A shortness of breath that arrived without warning when she pushed too hard. The feeling on the second morning of waking up and having to remind herself 3 times to breathe deeply before her body stopped fighting the air. Cole noticed. He didn't say anything directly, which she respected. Instead, on the second morning, he adjusted the pace of everything. Without explanation, moved the water carry to after breakfast instead of before. Shortened the first supply run by half a mile, made the evening meal the larger one. Small recalibrations, each one practical, none of them calling attention to what they were compensating for. She figured it out on the 3rd day. You're managing me, she said. He was mending a piece of harness at the work table. He looked up. I'm managing the situation, he said. That includes you right now because you're new to altitude. In 2 weeks, you'll adjust. Then I won't have to. What if I'd rather push through it, she said. You can, he said. But pushing through altitude sickness on the 3rd day of a new camp cost you 3 weeks of recovery instead of 1 week of patience. He went back to the harness. Your call. She thought about it for about 4 seconds. Fine, she said. But tell me when you're doing it. Deal, he said. That was the first negotiation. There would be many more. She began to understand a man and a woman who each had strong ideas about how things should be done, and neither of them was built for deference, and the mountain was too serious a place for the kind of polite friction that passes for compromise in more comfortable circumstances. What they developed instead over those first days was something closer to a working language shorthand, mostly built out of observation. She learned that when he went quiet in a particular way, he was calculating something and needed the space to finish. He learned that when she asked a question that sounded casual, she wasn't making conversation, she was filling a gap in her knowledge, and he should answer it seriously. It was not easy, but it worked. The mornings were cold enough that their breath hung in the air even in summer, and the work started before full light and did not stop until well after dark. Cole trapped the upper line a series of sets running along the ridge and down through the timber, and Anna managed the camp water firewood food preparation, the maintenance of equipment that broke constantly and needed to be fixed with whatever was on hand, because the nearest supply was 3 days away. She learned to pack a wound with moss that Cole identified for her on the 2nd day, showing her the difference between the kind that drew out infection and the kind that caused it. She learned to read the sky above the ridge for weather that was still hours away by the time it became visible. She learned slowly, and with several near misses, to build a fire in wind, but the real education was in the traps. On the 5th day, Cole took her up the line with him. "You need to know this," he said, that morning, handing her a pair of heavy gloves before they left. "If something happens to me, you can't maintain the camp without knowing where the sets are." It was the first time either of them had said, "if something happens to me," out loud, and it sat in the air between them for a moment, with the weight of a thing that was not hypothetical up here, the way it would have been in town. "Show me," she said. He showed her. 14 sets along the upper line, each one placed with a logic she began to see. After the third, the animal run here, the natural funneling of the terrain there, the way a particular rock formation created a predictable travel corridor. Cole explained as he worked, not in the way of a teacher performing a lesson, but in the way of a man thinking out loud to someone he trusted to keep up, and Anna kept up filing every detail, with the same methodical attention she had once applied to her mother's preserving calendar and her father's account books. "Why that angle?" she asked at the 9th set, watching him position the pan. "Wind comes down this slope from the northwest most mornings," he said, "sets it against the scent direction. Animal approaches from the east and doesn't read it until it's already in the zone. And if the wind shifts..." He looked at her with a brief appraising look. "Then we miss. And we reset." He smoothed the earth around the set with a flat piece of bark. "The mountain doesn't always cooperate. You adjust." She knelt beside him and looked at the set. "Show me the reset." He showed her. That was day 5. On day 7, she ran the lower portion of the line alone while he repaired the lean-to cache on the eastern approach. She reset 2 disturbed sets, freed a snowshoe hare from a third, and identified a sign at the ridge edge that she brought back to him in the form of a precise description. "Something big came through the upper approach last night," she said. "Tracks wider than my handspan. Claws. Came from the north and went back the same way." Cole set down the tool he was working with. His expression didn't change dramatically, but she had already learned to read the small variations in it, and what she read now was alert. "Where exactly?" she told him. He listened, and she watched the calculation move through him. "Bear," he said. "Came down from the high timber. Not unusual this time of summer, but..." He stopped. "But," she said. "The direction means it came past the east cache," he said. "I need to go check it." "I'll come." "No," he said, and the word had a specific flatness that told her it was not refusal, but assessment. "I need you to stay here and keep the fire. If I'm not back by dark, take the bay down the switchback trail to the lower meadow and wait. Don't come up after me." She looked at him. "Cole?" "If you come up after me in the dark and I'm down," he said steadily, "then we're both down. That's not useful. You staying here is the useful thing." He was right. She knew he was right. The knowledge of it sat in her chest like cold water. "Be back by dark," she said. "Intend to," he said. He took the long rifle from the wall hooks and went. The next 4 hours were the longest Anna had spent since the night before she left Red Hollow. She kept the fire, and she mended a section of supply pack, and she did not watch the door every 3 minutes, or told herself she wasn't even when she was. The light moved across the cabin floor, the way it only moves at altitude faster. Somehow, more decided, and the shadows outside deepened, and she built the fire higher and put the coffee on and waited. He came through the door 40 minutes before full dark. "Cache is fine," he said. "Bear moved on, probably following the berry line north." He hung the rifle and shrugged off his coat and stopped when he saw her face. "I was fine," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm making coffee." He sat down at the table without comment. She brought 2 cups and sat across from him, and they drank in the particular silence that comes after a scare when both people know what was at stake and are choosing not to say it directly. Then Cole said, "You identified the sign correctly." "You sound surprised," Anna said. "I'm not surprised," he said. "I'm..." He stopped. He turned the cup in his hands. I've been up here alone for 5 years. I forgot what it was like to have someone notice things. That sat between them for a moment, with a quality that was different from the silences that had come before. Warmer, more dangerous in its way. "What made you come down?" Anna asked. "This time, I mean. What made you decide you needed—" She paused, choosing the word carefully. "A partner." Cole was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Last winter the creek froze 2 weeks early. I was pulling a set on the North Ridge, and I went through a snow shelf. Nothing serious, twisted my knee, took me about 2 hours to get back to camp. But the whole way back I was—" He stopped again. "I kept thinking about what would have happened if it had been my leg instead of my knee. If it had been worse. And there was nobody who would have known. Not for months." He said it plainly, the way he said everything without decoration. But Anna heard what was under it, not fear exactly, but the particular loneliness of a man who had finally encountered the hard edge of what he'd built for himself. "That's the thing about living alone," she said quietly. "It works, until it doesn't. And by the time it stops working, you're already in trouble." "Yeah," he said. They drank their coffee. Outside the mountain, dark came down fully absolute and enormous, the way it only gets above the tree line, and the fire threw its light against the cabin walls, and Anna Calloway sat across from Cole Maddox and felt for the first time, in as long as she could remember, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, which was when the knock on the door happened. Neither of them moved for a beat. Not because they were afraid, though the sound of a knock at this altitude, this far from anything, was not a sound you expected, but because both of them were in their separate ways recalibrating. Knocks on this door did not happen. In 5 years, Cole had said he'd had 2 visitors. A trapper named Silas, who ran a line to the south, and once a lost hunting party that he'd set back on the right trail and sent away. Cole was at the door before Anna had finished standing. He opened it with one hand and kept his other hand near his belt. The man on the other side was not a threat, at least not the immediate physical kind. He was maybe 50, weathered in the way of men who spend time outside, but not in the way of men who live outside, and he was wearing town clothes that had been badly mistreated by the trail, and he was breathing in the shallow, rapid way of a man who'd come up the mountain without acclimatizing properly. "Cole Maddox," the man said. "Who's asking?" Cole said. "My name is Reg Loomis," the man said. "I'm a land agent out of Billings. He coughed. "I've been trying to find you for 3 weeks." Cole's posture didn't change. "Find me for what?" Loomis looked past Cole at Anna, and a flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise, recalibration, and then he looked back at Cole. "There's a claim dispute," he said. "On this land. The Upper Ridge parcel." The words landed in the cabin with the weight of something dropped from a height. Cole stepped back from the door, not inviting, just creating space. "Come in," he said, "and talk." Loomis came in. He sat at the table and accepted a cup of water and worked on catching his breath, and Cole stood with his arms crossed and his weight settled in the way Anna had come to recognize as his position when he was listening hard and trusting nothing. "There's a man named Harlan Cross," Loomis said. Anna went very still. "He's been buying up land patents along the lower ridge for 2 years, Loomis said. Quietly, through intermediaries. The First Territorial Bank has been doing the paperwork." He pulled a folded document from his coat. 3 months ago, someone filed an amended survey on the Upper Ridge parcel. The survey moved the boundary line, puts your cabin and your trap lines inside a claim that was transferred to Cross Holdings in April. Cole took the document. He looked at it without apparent hurry, the way he looked at everything completely from beginning to end, without skipping. "This survey is wrong," he said. "I believe you," Loomis said. "But—" "The boundary post is on the north side of the creek," Cole said. "Has been since the original filing in '82. I've got the original survey document in this cabin. Whoever filed this amended version moved the line 40 yards south." "I know," Loomis said. "That's why I'm here. I was hired by the Territorial Land Office in Billings to investigate irregularities in the Cross Holdings acquisitions. This is the 7th parcel I've found with an anomalous survey." He paused. You are not the first person Harlan Cross has done this to. Cole set the document down on the table slowly. Anna looked at him. She had seen his face in cold and wind, and the particular tension of a man assessing a bear sign in the dark. And she had learned its vocabulary well enough by now to know what she was seeing. This was not anger. It was something older and steadier than anger. This was a man looking at a thing he had been waiting somewhere below consciousness to arrive. How long do I have? Cole asked. The claim becomes legally actionable in 45 days, Loomis said. If you can produce the original survey and any supporting documentation, the land office can challenge it. But Cross has money and lawyers and a judge in Billings who has ruled in his favor 3 times. Loomis folded his hands on the table. I want to be honest with you, Mr. Maddox. I've seen what Cross does to people who fight him. He doesn't just take the land. He takes everything that was built on it. He's done it to homesteaders, to small ranchers. He's done it to at least one bankrupt farmer in Red Hollow, Anna said. Both men looked at her. Thomas Calloway, she said, meeting Cole's eyes. My father's land, the debt to the First Territorial Bank. I always thought it was just bad luck and worse decisions. She paused. What if it wasn't? The question sat in the cabin with the fire and the mountain dark pressing against the windows, and Loomis looked at her with the expression of a man who has just heard a piece of information slot into a gap in a pattern he's been trying to map for a long time. What was your father's parcel? Loomis asked slowly. South flat below the ridge, Anna said. About 60 acres. He had a clear deed until the bank called the debt 2 winters ago. Loomis was very still. Who brokered the bank debt? I don't know, Anna said, but I know who handled the foreclosure paperwork. She paused, and the name came out of her with the particular flatness of something that has been stored a long time in a cold place. Harlan Cross. The fire snapped once in the hearth. The mountain was entirely silent outside. Cole looked at Loomis. How many of these cases do you have documentation for? Enough, Loomis said quietly. But I need the original survey from this parcel to make the pattern legible. Right now, I have 7 anomalies. What I need is one clean case, one where the original documentation is intact, and the alteration is provable. He looked at Cole steadily. You may be that case. Cole went to the shelf above the fireplace. He moved 2 items, lifted a board, and took out a flat tin box that Anna had not known was there. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside was a folded document yellowed at the edges and creased along the folds with the look of paper that had been consulted many times over many years and had been returned each time to the same careful storage. Cole laid it open on the table. Anna looked at it. She looked at the date. July 1882. She looked at the boundary notations, the measurement records, the signature of the original surveyor 1. James Treadwell, out of Billings, date stamped and registered with the Territorial Land Office. The boundary post was on the north side of the creek, exactly where Cole had said. Loomis looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Cole. Then he looked at Anna. And in his expression she could see the particular quality of a man who has been chasing something for a long time and has just found it. Mr. Maddox, he said quietly, I think you just became the case that breaks Harlan Cross. Cole looked at the document for a moment. Then he folded it back, set it in the tin, and closed the lid. What do you need from us? He said. Not from me. From us. Anna heard it. She was certain Loomis heard it too from the brief glance he sent in her direction. She kept her own face still, but something moved in her chest. Something about that word us said plainly, and without emphasis, as if it were simply the accurate word for what they were. I need you both to come to Billings, Loomis said. Within the next 2 weeks, the land office can hold a hearing if we file the original survey against the amended one, with your testimony and Miss... He paused, looking at Anna. Calloway, she said. A pause from Loomis. Thomas Calloway's daughter. Yes. He looked at her with the new intensity. Miss Calloway, if your father's foreclosure was engineered by Cross through the bank, and if we can document that—" He stopped himself, visibly reining back a certainty he wasn't ready to commit to yet. "It could be relevant to the larger case. It could mean the foreclosure on your father's land was fraudulent." The word landed in Anna's chest like something physical. Fraudulent. Not bad luck, not bad decisions, not the inevitable end of a careless man. Engineered. She thought about her father's hands, about May's face in the doorway at dawn, about 3 years of watching her family come apart at the seams while Harlan Cross sat in his house on the good side of Main Street and told men at the summer gathering that Thomas Calloway's daughter came with debt attached. She looked at Cole. He was watching her with that steady, direct attention, not telling her what to feel, not managing the moment. Just present in it, with her in the way she was beginning to understand was the deepest thing about him, his absolute refusal to look away from whatever the truth was. "We'll be in Billings," she said. Cole nodded once. Loomis stayed the night on the cabin floor, which Cole offered without ceremony, and Loomis accepted with the gratitude of a man who had been sleeping on trail ground for 3 weeks. By morning, the land agent was himself again, fed and warm and systematic, going over the documentation at the work table with Cole, while Anna made the calculations about what leaving the camp for a week would mean for the trapline and the supply cache. They were not small calculations. Leaving the upper line untended for 7 days in summer could cost them a significant portion of the seasonal take. The east cache needed to be secured against the bear that had come through. The horses needed the lower meadow feed before a long ride. She worked through it methodically, the way she worked through everything now, and when Cole finished with Loomis and came to where she was standing, she handed him the list. He read it. He adjusted 2 items and handed it back. "We can do this in 1 day if we start now," he said. "I know," she said. "I already packed." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she had come to associate with something he would not say directly but meant completely. Then he turned to Loomis. "We move in an hour." And somewhere below them, 3 days' ride south, in a town called Red Hollow, Harlan Cross was sitting across a desk from a banker with clean hands and a dirty ledger discussing the acquisition of another parcel, another family, another life he intended to fold into his portfolio like a bill of sale, entirely unaware that 45 days was now a clock, and the clock had started, and the woman he had dismissed as a walking debt in a faded blue dress was riding down a mountain with the only document that could end him. The ride down took 2.5 days instead of 3, because Cole set a pace that did not allow for anything unnecessary, and Anna matched it without complaint. Loomis rode between them, which was partly logistics, and partly Anna suspected the unconscious positioning of a man who was aware he was traveling with 2 people who communicated in a frequency he couldn't quite hear. He was not a bad traveling companion. He was quiet when quiet was needed, and useful when useful was possible. And on the second night, when Anna's fire refused to catch in the damp air, he produced a piece of pitch-soaked cord from his kit that solved the problem in 30 seconds. She revised her opinion of him upward. They did not talk much about what was waiting in Billings. There was an unspoken agreement between the 3 of them that the facts were the facts and had already been discussed, and going over them again on the trail would not change them and would cost energy that belonged to the riding. Cole carried the tin box inside his coat the entire way down. Anna saw him check it once, just once, at the second camp, opening it briefly and running his thumb along the edge of the document before closing it again and setting it back against his chest. He didn't know she'd seen it. She didn't mention it. What she thought about riding down through the thinning timber and into the warming air of the lower altitude was her father. She had not allowed herself to think about him seriously since the night she left, because thinking about him seriously required accounting for things that were too heavy to carry up a mountain on top of everything else. But Loomis's word fraudulent had opened something that could not be easily closed. She kept turning it over, kept measuring it against what she remembered of the years when the debt had grown and the bank had tightened, and her father had become gradually the man she'd watched in the barn. Nervous, diminished, working the performance of someone trying to make a deal he had no leverage for. She had blamed him. She had done it quietly, and without announcement, the way you blame someone when you love them, and the blame has nowhere useful to go. But she had done it. She had looked at his broken ledgers and his borrowed against acres, and the tired bewilderment in his face, and thought, you did this. You made these choices, and we are all living in the consequences. What if that was only half true? What if the bank had been looking for a man to ruin, and her father had simply been the man who was available? She didn't know yet. She wouldn't know until Billings. But the question sat with her the whole way down the mountain, and it changed the quality of everything she was riding toward, made it heavier and more urgent and more personal than it had been when it was only about Cole's land. They came into Red Hollow on the afternoon of the second full day, because the most direct route to Billings ran through the south end of town, and there was no practical way around it that didn't add half a day. Cole had not said anything about stopping. Anna had not asked. But when they came down Main Street, and the familiar dust, and the familiar storefronts, and the familiar faces began to register around her, something in Anna's spine went rigid and straight, the way it always had in this town. The old reflex, the old armor, and she kept her eyes forward, and her face still, and her hands loose on the reins. They were almost through when she heard her name. Anna! It was May. Her sister was standing outside the dry goods store with a basket and an expression that moved through surprise, relief, and about 6 other things in the space of 2 seconds. Anna pulled up. She looked at May, and May looked at her, and then May's eyes moved to Cole, and then to Loomis, and then back to Anna, with a question she didn't have time to ask. I can't stop, Anna said. We're going to Billings. There's a hearing. A hearing for what? May said. Papa's land, Anna said. There may be something I'll explain in a letter, I promise. Are you all right? I'm fine, May said, but the word fine was doing a lot of work. Anna could hear it straining under the load. May. He's not good, May said quietly. He hasn't been out of the house in 2 weeks. He just sits. She glanced toward the end of the street. I think he's given up. Anna felt that in her chest. She looked at Cole. He was watching her with his usual steadiness, giving her the moment, not rushing it. Tell him, Anna said to May, that it might not be over. Tell him there's a hearing, and there's a land agent, and tell him to hold on. She paused. Can you do that? Yes, May said, then lower. Is this real, or are you telling me this so I'll tell him something to get through the week? It's real, Anna said. I wouldn't give him false hope. I know better than that. May looked at her for a long moment, and in that look was everything that 2 sisters can say to each other across a street, in a town that has not been kind to either of them. Then she nodded. Go, May said, and come back. I will, Anna said. They rode on. She did not look back at the dry goods store, but she heard May's footsteps moving back toward the door, and she carried the sound of them all the way to the edge of town. They hit the Billings Road at dusk. It was another full day's ride east, and they covered most of it through the night, stopping only for a few hours, when the horses needed it, and by the time the city came into view in the gray morning light, Anna had not slept more than 3 hours, and her back ached in a way she was not going to mention to anyone. Billings was not a large city by any Eastern measure, but after 2 weeks above the timberline and 3 years in Red Hollow, it felt enormous. The noise of it hit first the particular density of sound that comes from a place where many people are doing many things simultaneously. Then the scale. Then the faces of strangers, which were not unkind, but were not known, and there was something disorienting about that after the clean clarity of the mountain, where every living thing you encountered was either useful or dangerous, and you knew which almost immediately. Loomis took them to the land office on the north side of the main commercial street. It was a 2-story building with a federal seal above the door, and the particular air of a place that took itself seriously, which Anna found both reassuring and slightly intimidating. And she filed the intimidation away as useless and went in. The man behind the counter was a clerk named Aldrich, who recognized Loomis and straightened noticeably when he saw the tin box under Cole's arm. You found him, Aldrich said. He found me, Loomis said. Is Director Whitmore in? He's been waiting 3 days, Aldrich said, and there was a weight in that sentence that told Anna the director's patience had been significant and was perhaps approaching its limit. Director Whitmore was a thin man in his 60s with the kind of face that had once been capable of a wide range of expressions and had been worn by bureaucratic work down to 2 listening and deciding. He shook Cole's hand and looked at the tin box and said, "Let's see it," without preamble. Cole set it on the table and opened it and laid the document flat. Whitmore looked at it for 4 minutes without speaking. He had a second document beside it, the amended survey, and he moved his eyes between them with the focused attention of a man who has looked at a great many surveys in his life and knows precisely where to look for the thing that doesn't fit. 40 yards, he said finally. South of the creek, Cole said. And the original post, still there? Cole said. I checked it before we left. Northeast corner 3 notches on the north face, the way Treadwell marked all his posts in the '82 survey. Whitmore looked at Loomis. How many of these do you have now? 8, Loomis said. With Calloway's father's foreclosure, potentially 9. But the Calloway situation requires more documentation. We'd need access to the bank's origination records to establish the engineering of the debt. You won't get those voluntarily, Whitmore said. No, Loomis agreed. But a territorial court order could compel them. If we establish fraud on the survey side, we have grounds for the order. Whitmore looked at Cole. Are you prepared to testify at a formal hearing? Yes, Cole said. It will require you to remain in Billings for several days, possibly a week. I understand. Whitmore looked at Anna. And you're Thomas Calloway's daughter. I am, Anna said. Do you have any documentation of the original debt arrangements? Any correspondence with the bank? Any loan papers? Anything with a cross-holding signature or reference? My father would have those papers, Anna said, if they still exist. We'd need him to produce them voluntarily, Whitmore said. Or at minimum, to provide a sworn statement about how the debt was presented to him and by whom. He paused. Is your father a stable witness? Is he capable of making a statement? Anna thought about what May had said. He just sits. I think he's given up. He will be, she said, when he understands what's at stake. Whitmore looked at her steadily. And what is at stake as far as your family is concerned? If the foreclosure was fraudulent, Anna said, then the land was taken illegally, which means Cross doesn't own it, which means... She stopped and the shape of what she was saying finished itself in the air of that room without her needing to complete it. Which means your father could have his land back, Whitmore said. The words sat in the room. Anna kept her face level. She did not allow herself to feel the full weight of it, yet it was too early. There were too many steps between here and that outcome, and she had learned in 3 hard years that hope without a foundation is just a way of setting yourself up for a harder fall. But she allowed herself to note the possibility, to hold it carefully like something fragile that might turn out to be strong. What do you need from us first? She asked. Whitmore looked at Cole. The hearing is in 2 days. I'll need your original survey, your testimony about the boundary post, and anything you can document about the history of the claim, when you filed, what improvements you made, how long you've been in continuous occupation. I have all of that, Cole said. Good. Whitmore turned to Loomis. Get me the Calloway file cross-referenced against the Cross Holdings acquisition records by tomorrow morning. He stood, which was apparently how he ended meetings. Mr. Maddox, Miss Calloway, I want you to understand something before you leave this office. They waited. Harlan Cross has powerful friends in this territory, Whitmore said. He has money, he has legal representation, and he has a track record of making these cases expensive and difficult and slow enough that most people give up before they get to a hearing. He looked at them both in turn. I am telling you this, not to discourage you, but because I want you to know what you're walking into. If you go to that hearing in 2 days, Cross will know about it within hours. He will respond, and the response will not be limited to legal arguments. Cole met his eyes. What do you mean by that? I mean that 3 of the 8 people who initially came forward in the other cases subsequently changed their testimony, Whitmore said flatly. 2 of them cited concerns for their families. 1 of them simply stopped responding to correspondence. He paused. I'm not in the business of frightening witnesses, but I would be doing you a disservice if I sent you into this without knowing the full landscape. The room was quiet. Then Cole said in the voice he used when something was completely settled, "Where do we stay while we're in town?" Whitmore allowed himself the smallest movement of his mouth that might, under generous interpretation, have been a smile. "Aldrich will arrange rooms," he said, "at the office's expense." They were shown to a boarding house 2 streets over, 2 rooms, plain but clean, the kind of place that served working people doing serious business. Anna sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall for about 30 seconds, and then she stood up and went to Cole's room and knocked. He opened the door and read her face. "Come in," he said. She sat in the chair by the window, and he sat on the bed, and she said, "What do you think Cross is going to do?" "I think he's going to find out about the hearing by tomorrow morning," Cole said. "I think he'll send someone to talk to us before it happens, offer something, make a case for why this isn't worth our time. And if we don't take the offer, then he'll try to find something that makes us look unreliable as witnesses," Cole said. "That's how men like him work. They don't fight the evidence. They fight the people carrying it." Anna was quiet for a moment. "He already has something on me," she said. "My father's name. The debt. If he can make this look like a daughter trying to reclaim her family's failed land through a manufactured legal challenge." "He can try," Cole said. "But you're not the primary witness, I am, and he doesn't have anything on me." "Are you sure?" she said. Cole looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been alone up that mountain for 5 years, and you came down to a marriage gathering and walked across a room to a woman you'd never met and offered her a situation that most people in Red Hollow found strange at best." She held his gaze. "If Cross wants to paint you as unstable or unconventional, or—" "Let him," Cole said quietly. "Unconventional isn't a legal argument. The survey document is a legal argument. The boundary post is a legal argument." He paused. "Anna, look at me." She looked at him. "Are you telling me you're afraid?" he asked, not challenging, genuinely asking. "I'm telling you I'm being realistic," she said. "Those aren't the same thing," he said. "And you know the difference." She did know the difference. She'd spent 3 years being realistic in Red Hollow, and it had looked a great deal like fear from the inside, and she had sometimes confused the two herself. But what she was doing right now was not fear. It was the work of a woman who had learned the hard way to see the full shape of a situation before she committed herself to a position within it. "I'm not backing down," she said. "I know," he said. "I just want to be sure we've thought about every angle." "We have," he said. "And even if there are angles we haven't thought about, we have the document, and we have the post, and we have Loomis's pattern of 8 cases. That's more than Cross has accounted for." Anna nodded slowly. Then she said, "I want to write to May tonight. I want her to tell Papa to get those bank papers together, whatever he has, anything with a signature." "I'll get you paper and ink from the front desk," Cole said. He stood. "Cole!" She stopped him before he reached the door. He turned. "What Whitmore said about the witnesses who changed their testimony, the ones who cited concerns for their families." Cole waited. "My father and May are in Red Hollow," she said. The thing that moved across Cole's face was not alarm, but it was something in that family of feelings, the rapid, controlled assessment of a man who has just identified a variable he should have accounted for sooner. "I'll send a rider tonight," he said. "Someone I trust. He'll stay at your father's house until this is over." "You have someone you trust in Billings." "Silas," he said, "the trapper who runs the South Line. He winters in town. He owes me a favor that's been waiting 2 years to be called in." He was already moving. "Write your letter. I'll get the paper and arrange the rider." He left. Anna sat in the chair and breathed. It occurred to her sitting in that boarding house room in Billings, with the noise of the city coming through the window, that 3 weeks ago, she had been standing in a barn in Red Hollow, wearing a faded dress that used to be blue, and the whole of her future had seemed to consist of nothing but diminishment. The slow grinding process of becoming less and less until there was nothing left to become. And now she was sitting in the middle of a legal case that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the territory. She was a witness. She was a partner. She was the woman who had identified the bear sign and ridden the upper trap line and cleaned a wound that was going infected and made decisions about things that mattered. She was not invisible. The paper arrived. She wrote to May, clear, direct, specific. Get Papa's bank papers. Every letter, every loan document, every signature from Cross or the bank. Lock them somewhere safe, and don't show them to anyone until I tell you it's time. She wrote it the way Cole talked, honestly, without padding, with the assumption that May was capable of following through. Because she was. Anna had always known May was capable. She just hadn't always given her the chance to prove it. The next morning came fast. Cole was at the land office at 7. Anna was with him. Loomis arrived 20 minutes later with a folder that had grown considerably since the cabin. And Director Whitmore opened the proceedings with the expression of a man who was about to do something that was going to cost him political capital and had decided it was worth it. They were 4 hours into the documentation review when Aldrich knocked on the door and came in with the particular expression of a man delivering information he would have preferred to give differently. "There's a man downstairs," Aldrich said. "Says he represents Cross Holdings. He's asking to speak to Mr. Maddox and—" He paused, and the pause told Anna exactly where the message had come from and who had delivered it. "And Miss Calloway." Whitmore looked at Cole. Cole looked at Anna. "What's his name?" Anna asked. "He gave his name as Gerald Fitch," Aldrich said. "He's a lawyer out of Helena." Helena, not Billings. Cross had brought someone in from outside, which meant he'd known about this faster than Cole had predicted, which meant he had eyes somewhere closer than any of them had accounted for. "Tell him we'll be down in 10 minutes, Cole said. Aldrich left. Whitmore looked at them both. "You're not obligated to speak to him. I know," Cole said. "But I want to hear what he's offering. It'll tell us how worried Cross actually is." They went down. Gerald Fitch was a compact man in an expensive suit who had the smooth, unhurried manner of a lawyer who had won most of the cases he'd taken and attributed this to skill rather than the wealth of his clients. He stood when they came into the front room and extended his hand to Cole with a practiced warmth that did not reach his eyes. Cole shook it briefly. Anna did not extend her hand. Fitch noted this. "Miss Calloway," he said with a small acknowledgement of her name that managed to carry in its slight emphasis the suggestion that he knew exactly who she was and where she came from. "My client is aware of the concerns that have been raised about the boundary survey. He believes this matter can be resolved without the need for a formal hearing." "Is that right?" Cole said. "Mr. Cross is prepared to offer a modified lease arrangement on the Upper Ridge parcel," Fitch said. "Favorable terms. You would retain use of the land and the cabin for your lifetime with no further dispute on the boundary question." "A lease on land that's already mine," Cole said. "On land whose ownership is currently in question," Fitch said carefully. "The ownership is in question because someone filed a fraudulent survey," Cole said. "The original survey places the boundary north of the creek. That hasn't changed." Fitch's manner remained smooth, but something shifted just slightly underneath it. "Mr. Maddox, I understand your position, but I want to be candid with you about the practical realities. These proceedings can take months. The legal costs." "I'm not paying legal costs," Cole said. "The land office is pursuing this." A beat. Fitch had not apparently confirmed that detail yet. He recovered quickly. "Even so, the disruption to your operation, the time away from your—" "What about Thomas Calloway's land?" Anna said. Fitch turned to her. The smoothness didn't change, but she could see him recalibrating. This was not a question he had been briefed to expect, which meant the Calloway connection to the case was either not fully known to Cross or not fully understood. "I'm not sure what you mean," Fitch said. "My father's 60 acres, Anna said. Foreclosed by the First Territorial Bank 2 years ago. Harlan Cross handled the foreclosure. The land was subsequently transferred to Cross Holdings." She kept her voice even. "I'm asking whether your client's offer extends to that parcel." Fitch looked at her for a long moment. "That's a separate matter entirely." "Is it?" she said. The room was very quiet. Cole was watching Fitch the way he watched the ridge when weather was coming steady, patient reading signs. Fitch gathered himself. "I'll convey your questions to my client," he said. "But I want to be clear. My client's offer on the Maddox parcel is time-limited. If the hearing proceeds—" "The hearing proceeds," Cole said. Fitch looked at him. He looked at Anna. He looked at the tin box under Cole's arm, which Cole had not set down since they left the cabin, and in Fitch's expression, she could see a man doing a rapid calculation and arriving at a number he didn't like. "I'll be in touch," Fitch said. "No need," Cole said. Fitch left. The front room was quiet. Anna looked at Cole. Cole looked at the door through which Fitch had gone. "He didn't know about my father's land," Anna said. "No," Cole said. "Which means Cross didn't either. Or not fully." He turned to her. "Which means Loomis is right. The pattern is bigger than any of them realized. And we just told them we know it." "Was that a mistake?" she said. "No," Cole said. "It was a warning." He turned back toward the stairs. "Come on. Whitmore needs to know about that conversation before the afternoon session." They went back up. That evening, a writer came to the boarding house asking for Anna Calloway. He was carrying a letter. She recognized May's handwriting before she broke the seal. She read it once quickly, and then again slowly, and then she stood very still for a moment, holding it in both hands. Cole came out of his room and saw her face. "What is it?" "May found the papers," Anna said. "The original loan documents. The ones my father signed when he took the bank debt." She looked up. "Cross's name isn't on them directly. But there's a letter, handwritten to the bank manager recommending that the debt be called early 6 months before the terms allowed for it under the original agreement." She paused. "It's signed by Harlan Cross, and it's dated 3 months before the foreclosure." Cole was very still. "He pushed the bank to call the debt early," Anna said. "Before Papa had any chance to make good on it. He manufactured the default." She felt something moving through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but was made of both of them, the cold, clarifying thing that happens when the last piece of a puzzle drops into place and the picture it makes is uglier than you prepared yourself for. "He did it on purpose. He needed the land, and my father was in the way, and so he—" She stopped. "Anna," Cole said. 3 years, she said. 3 years we thought it was our fault. My father thought it was his fault. He's been sitting in that house thinking he destroyed his family through his own stupidity, and it was—" She stopped again. Cole crossed the distance between them and put his hand on her arm, and it was not a romantic gesture, and it was not a comforting gesture. In any soft sense of the word, it was the gesture of one person steadying another on difficult terrain, which was the only kind of steadying Cole Maddox knew how to do. It was exactly what she needed. It was his fault that there was debt, Cole said quietly. That part was still true. But the rest of it that was Cross. And in 2 days, we're going to prove it in front of a territorial court. Anna took a breath. Then another. "I need to get this letter to Loomis tonight," she said. "Yes," Cole said. He did not let go of her arm yet. "Are you all right?" She considered the question honestly. "No," she said. "But I will be." He let go. She straightened. She folded May's letter carefully and put it inside her coat close to her chest and turned toward the door, and she walked toward what was coming with her chin level and her boots on solid ground. Tomorrow, Harlan Cross would learn that the woman he had dismissed as a footnote in her own family's failure had spent the last 3 weeks becoming the most consequential witness in the case that was going to end him. He would not see it coming. He should have looked more carefully in that barn. Loomis read May's letter 3 times. The first time he read it, the way he read everything systematically front to back, letting the information settle into sequence. The second time he read it, slowly pausing at specific lines, his finger moving along the paper with the focused attention of a man confirming what he thought he'd understood. The third time, he set the letter flat on the table and read it without touching it, the way you look at something you don't want to disturb. Then he looked up at Anna and said, "Do you understand what this is?" "Tell me," she said. "The terms of your father's loan allowed 60 days' notice before the bank could call the debt," Loomis said. "Cross's letter instructed the bank manager to issue the call with 14 days' notice. Not 60. 14. He tapped the page. "That's not a technicality. That's a violation of the original contract. It means the foreclosure was conducted on a default that was manufactured, not just influenced manufactured by Cross himself, outside the legal terms of the agreement." He looked at Cole, then back at Anna. "Combined with the survey fraud on your parcel, this gives us 2 independent lines of criminal conduct: land fraud and contract manipulation. That's not a civil dispute anymore. That's grounds for criminal charges." The word criminal sat in the room. Anna had been prepared for legal. She had not let herself think as far as criminal, because that was a longer road and a harder one, and she had spent too many years being disappointed by the distance between what should happen and what actually did. But hearing Loomis say it in the flat, certain voice of a man who dealt in documents for a living, that was different. "Will Whitmore move on it?" Cole asked. "He will if I put this in front of him tonight," Loomis said. He was already reaching for his coat. "The hearing tomorrow covers the survey fraud and the boundary dispute. But if I file this letter as supplementary evidence tonight, Whitmore can expand the scope of the proceedings in the morning." He paused at the door. "I need to keep the original. Can your sister send the original?" "I'll write to her tonight," Anna said. "She can ride to the postal office first thing. It'll be here day after tomorrow." "That's fast enough," Loomis said. He looked at her with the expression of a man who was revising upward again an estimate he'd already revised twice. "Miss Calloway, that letter changes the shape of this case entirely." "I know," she said. He left. The room was quieter without him. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot on the side table. They had been supplied a pot and a spirit lamp by the boarding house landlady, who had apparently decided they were serious people engaged in serious business, and had treated them accordingly, and handed one to Anna and sat down. She wrote to May. Cole drank his coffee and watched her write, and did not speak, which was one of the things she had come to rely on in him, his ability to be present without filling the space with noise. When she finished, she folded the letter and sealed it and set it by the door for the morning post. Then she sat back in her chair and let herself be tired for a moment. Just a moment, in the particular way you allow yourself to be tired when the work has temporarily paused, and you know there is more work coming, but it isn't here yet. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Cole asked. "Yes," she said. Then, "Are you?" "Yes," he said. "What do you think Cross will do when the hearing starts?" Cole considered. "He'll send Fitch to challenge the survey methodology. He'll argue that the original post has been moved or damaged over time and is no longer reliable as a reference point. He'll try to make the document dispute technical enough that Whitmore can't rule definitively without a second survey, which takes time, and during which Cross retains possession. And the letter. He won't know about the letter until Loomis files it," Cole said. "That's the one thing he hasn't had time to prepare for." He set his cup down. "That's the moment tomorrow. Not the survey. The letter." Anna nodded slowly. She looked at the fire, which was burning low and steady, and she thought about her father sitting in his house in Red Hollow, thinking he had destroyed his family through failure, and she thought about Harlan Cross in his house on the good side of the street. And the distance between those 2 images was the distance between a lie and the truth, and tomorrow she was going to close it. "Get some sleep," Cole said. "Tomorrow requires everything we have." She went to her room. She did not sleep immediately. Her mind was moving too quickly for that, but she lay still and let it move, and eventually it slowed, and she slept. The hearing room in the Territorial Land Office was not large. It held Whitmore at the head table with two associates, Loomis and his folder on the left, Cole and Anna on the right, and Fitch and a second lawyer. Anna hadn't seen before, seated across from them. A court recorder sat at a small desk near the door. There were no spectators. Whitmore had kept it closed, which Loomis had told them was deliberate and protective, because public hearings in Cross's previous cases had had a way of producing witnesses who subsequently could not recall what they had seen. Harlan Cross was not present. That was the first thing Anna noticed. He had sent his lawyers, but not come himself, which told her something about how he had calculated the risk of this proceeding low enough that he didn't need to be here, or high enough that he didn't want his face in the room when certain things were said. She would find out which before the morning was over. Whitmore opened at 8 o'clock sharp. He stated the matter plainly. Boundary dispute, amended survey versus original filing. The question of which document accurately reflected the established legal boundary of the Maddox Upper Ridge parcel. He was crisp and without theater about it, and Anna appreciated that, because theater would have made her more nervous, and clarity made her steadier. Fitch opened for Cross Holdings with exactly the argument Cole had predicted, a methodical challenge to the reliability of the original boundary post as a reference point, citing natural weathering potential movement, the fallibility of physical markers over a decade. He was smooth and well prepared, and he spoke with the confidence of a man who had made this argument before and watched it work. Cole testified. He was not a natural courtroom presence. In the way that Fitch was natural, he didn't have the polish or the practiced flow. What he had was better. He had the absolute, unperformable credibility of a man who knew every inch of the land he was describing, who had walked it in every season for 5 years, who could tell you the exact height of the boundary post and the depth of the notches and the direction of the lean it had developed in the third winter when the ground froze deep and then shifted back in the spring thaw, and which way it had settled when everything stabilized. He was specific in a way that no fabricated account could be, because fabricated accounts are built from general impressions, and Cole Maddox did not deal in general impressions. Fitch cross-examined him for 40 minutes and did not shake a single detail. Anna watched Fitch's second lawyer, the one she hadn't seen before, taking notes throughout, and she watched the notes becoming more frequent as the cross-examination failed to produce the result it was designed for, and she watched the second lawyer lean toward Fitch twice during a pause and say something quiet that made Fitch's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Then Loomis stood up and said, "Director Whitmore, I have a supplementary filing to enter into the record." Fitch looked up. Supplementary filings were to be submitted prior to the hearing. "This document became available last evening," Loomis said. "I'm requesting the director's discretion to enter it, given the material relevance to the broader pattern of conduct this hearing is designed to address." Whitmore looked at the folder Loomis was holding. "What is the nature of the document?" "A letter," Loomis said, "signed by Harlan Cross, directing the First Territorial Bank to issue a debt call notice to Thomas Calloway on terms that violated the original loan agreement, specifically issuing 14 days' notice where the contract required 60 days. The letter predates the foreclosure by 3 months and establishes that the default was not organic but engineered by Cross for the purpose of acquiring the Calloway parcel." He paused. "This is the 9th case in the pattern, and unlike the previous 8, this one has a direct paper trail to Cross himself." The room went very still. Fitch stood. "Director, I must object." "Sit down, Mr. Fitch," Whitmore said, not loudly, just finally. Fitch sat. Whitmore took the folder from Loomis and opened it and looked at the letter. He read it the way Loomis had read it the night before, once quickly, once slowly. Then he set it down and looked at Fitch with an expression that had moved from listening to deciding. "Mr. Fitch," Whitmore said, "does your client wish to respond to this document?" Fitch's smooth manner had developed a quality it had not had at the beginning of the morning. It was still smooth on the surface, but underneath it something had changed the way ice changes when the temperature rises, still holding its shape but no longer entirely trustworthy to hold weight. "My client is not present," Fitch said carefully. "Your client was given notice of this hearing," Whitmore said. He chose not to attend. I will ask again, does he wish to respond? I would need to consult. You have the remainder of this morning session, Whitmore said. The hearing will recess for 1 hour. When we reconvene, I will rule on the admissibility of the supplementary filing and proceed accordingly. He stood. We are recessed. The room shifted. Fitch was on his feet and moving toward the door. Before Whitmore had fully risen, his second lawyer close behind him, both of them with the clipped urgency of men who need to reach a telegraph office before a clock runs out. Cole watched them go. Then he looked at Loomis. He's going to wire Cross. In the next 15 minutes, Loomis agreed. What does Cross do when he finds out about the letter? Anna asked. He has 2 options, Loomis said. He can try to discredit the letter, claim it's forged, challenge its provenance, force a delay while the authenticity is verified. That buys him time, but it's a losing strategy if the handwriting analysis confirms it, which it will. He paused. Or he can negotiate. Negotiate what? Cole said. Terms, Loomis said. Settlements, agreements about what gets prosecuted and what gets resolved civilly, and what he voluntarily surrenders in exchange for reduced criminal exposure. He looked at them both. If he negotiates, the Callaway land is almost certainly on the table. He'd give it back as part of a settlement before he'd let the criminal case go to a full territorial court. Anna absorbed that, giving back, as part of a deal. Not vindication transaction. The land returned not because justice demanded it, but because Cross's lawyers had done the math and decided it was cheaper than a criminal trial. She looked at Cole. He was watching her face. Is that enough? He asked quietly, not telling her what to think. Asking. She thought about her father in that house. She thought about May at the door in the gray dawn. She thought about 3 years of watching her family carry a guilt that had been deliberately placed on them by a man with money and a pen and a bank manager who did what he was told. The land is enough, she said. But I want his name on the record. I want it in the official documents that what he did to my father was deliberate. She paused. He doesn't get to negotiate that part away. Loomis nodded slowly. I'll make sure Whitmore understands that condition. The recess lasted 53 minutes. When Fitch returned, he had the look of a man who had received instructions he did not entirely agree with, but was going to execute professionally because that was what he was paid for. He requested a private conference with Whitmore before the session reconvened, which Whitmore granted, and Loomis was invited in, and Cole and Anna waited in the hall outside the hearing room. They did not speak much. Cole stood with his back against the wall, and his arms crossed, and his eyes on the middle distance, and Anna stood beside him, with her hands quiet at her sides, and the sounds of the building moved around them. Footsteps, voices from other rooms, the creak of the building in the mid-morning heat. At one point, Cole said without looking at her, "Whatever comes out of that room, you did this." "We did this," she said. "Loomis found the pattern," Cole said. "I had the document, but the letter was yours. May found it because you told her to look for it. You knew what to look for because you understood what Cross had done because you'd lived inside the damage of it." He paused. "That's not nothing." "No," she said. "It's not." "I want you to remember that," he said. "When this is over, and the dust settles, and people start telling the story, I want you to remember that part of it." She looked at him. He was still looking at the middle-distance jaw, set the lines of his face in the particular arrangement that meant he had said something he meant completely and was not going to elaborate on. She remembered it. The doors opened 40 minutes later. Whitmore came out first. Behind him, Loomis, with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way of a man managing something larger than he is showing. Behind Loomis, Fitch, who was managing his own expression with the professional blankness of a man packing away a loss. Whitmore looked at Cole and Anna. "Come back in," he said. They went back in. Whitmore sat. He folded his hands on the table. He spoke for 12 minutes, and every minute of those 12 was the kind of speaking that Anna would remember for the rest of her life, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they added up to sentence by sentence, like a structure being built in real time. Cross Holdings was withdrawing its amended survey. The original boundary of the Maddox Upper Ridge parcel was confirmed as legally binding, with the boundary post on the north side of the creek as the established reference point. The claim dispute was resolved in favor of Cole Maddox, with prejudice, meaning it could not be relitigated. On the matter of the Callaway foreclosure, Cross Holdings had agreed to a voluntary reversion of the parcel 60 acres south flat below the ridge to Thomas Callaway, in exchange for the land office limiting the formal criminal referral to the survey fraud cases only. The Callaway matter would be recorded in the official proceedings as foreclosure conducted on improperly accelerated terms at the direction of Cross Holdings, which was not the full sentence Anna had wanted, but was, as Whitmore said, looking at her directly when he said it, a permanent part of the territorial record that cannot be expunged. His name, on the record, permanently. Anna kept her face level. She held herself together. She was very good at it by now. Then Whitmore said, "The criminal referral for survey fraud in the remaining 8 cases has been filed with the Territorial Prosecutor's Office this morning. The outcome of those proceedings is not within the scope of today's hearing, but the documentation is now in the hands of the appropriate authority." He looked at Cole. "Mr. Maddox, your land is yours. It has always been yours. Today we are simply confirming what was already true." Cole nodded once. "Thank you, Director." Whitmore gathered his papers. "The hearing is closed." Fitch left without speaking to either of them. His second lawyer followed. The court recorder packed his materials. Loomis stood by the window, looking at his folder with the expression of a man who has been carrying a heavy thing for a long time, and is only now beginning to register the absence of the weight. Anna stood in the middle of that room and breathed. Cole came and stood beside her. Closer than he usually stood, not touching, but present in a way that was different from the professional proximity of the last weeks. She was aware of it the way you are aware of warmth from a fire that you haven't been sitting close enough to feel until this moment. "It's done," she said. "Most of it," he said. She looked at him. "What's not done?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the careful, considered way he said things that mattered, "I told you in Red Hollow what I was offering. Hard work, cold nights, a cabin that's functional, but not comfortable." He paused. "That's still what I'm offering. Nothing about that has changed." She understood what he was doing. He was not assuming. He had made her an offer in a barn 3 weeks ago under circumstances that were, and he knew this, and she knew this, colored by desperation on her part, and something like rescue on his. And he was now, with the circumstances changed, reissuing the offer on clean terms. Giving her the chance to decide again, now that she had something other than desperation to decide with. "I know," she said. "The mountain is still there," he said. "The work is still real. I'm still a man who's been alone so long, I've forgotten a lot of the things that people who live near other people consider normal." He looked at her steadily. "But I know what you are now. And what you are, Fitz, what I've built up there better than anything I've seen in 34 years. "Cole," she said. "I'm asking again," he said. "Not because the situation requires it, because I want to." She looked at him. This man who had walked across a room full of judgment, and chosen her before he had any reason to, and had then spent 3 weeks learning exactly why he'd been right to, and who was now standing in a government hearing room in Billings with the dust of the mountain still in the creases of his coat, and his eyes on her face, with the same direct, unambiguous attention that had made her feel for the first time in years like she was the obvious choice. "I'm not going back to Red Hollow," she said, "except to see my father get his land back." "No," he agreed. "And I want to run the East Trap Line independently by fall." "You're already qualified," he said. "And you have to tell me when you're managing the situation," she said. That was the deal. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. That almost smile she had learned to read. "That was the deal," he said. "Then yes," she said. Same answer as the first time, but cleaner. He held her gaze for a moment, and in his face she could see the thing he would not perform and would not decorate. But that was entirely real, a relief, so deep and so genuine that it had no vanity in it. The relief of a man who had come down from a mountain looking for something specific, and had found it, and had been afraid, in the quiet of himself, that he might lose it before he understood what he had. He reached out and took her hand. Not with performance, just with steadiness. She held it. Loomis turned from the window, read the room, and found something very important to look at in his folder. They rode back to Red Hollow the next morning, all three of them with the official documentation from the land office in Loomis's saddlebag, and the weight of the last weeks sitting differently on all of them. Lighter in some places, heavier in others. The way things settle when they've been resolved rather than simply ended. They came down Main Street in the early afternoon, and Anna did not feel the old rigidity in her spine. She felt something else, not triumph exactly, because she was not built for the performance of triumph, but a clean, forward-facing alertness. The feeling of a person who knows who she is and where she's been, and is no longer asking the town's permission to take up space in it. May was at the house. She came out before they had finished tying the horses, and she looked at Anna's face and read it the way sisters read each other across distances, that words don't fully cross, and whatever she saw made her close her eyes for one moment and then open them again with a brightness in them that she was not trying to contain. "The land," she said. "Coming back," Anna said. "Loomis will handle the paperwork this week. Papa gets it back clean." May put both hands over her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, twice. Then she pulled them down and set her jaw, and nodded in the practical, undecorated way of a woman who has decided to feel this properly later in private when there is time. "He's inside," she said. "He doesn't know you're here." "I know," Anna said. "I'll go in." She went in alone. Thomas Calloway was at the kitchen table. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago, which was not possible by any rational measure, but was true nonetheless, or rather, he looked like a man who had finished arguing with himself about something and had arrived at the exhausted quiet on the other side of it. He looked up when she came in, and surprise moved through his face, and then something more careful, like a man who has learned not to hope too readily, because hope has been costing him too much. "Anna," he said. She sat down across from him. She put Loomis's copy of the settlement document on the table. He looked at it. He looked at her. He reached out and picked it up with hands that were not entirely steady. She did not rush him. She let him read it. She watched his face move through the document line by line, the formal language, the voluntary reversion, the notation about improperly accelerated terms, the cross-holding signature at the bottom that acknowledged what had been done to him and to whom. He got to the end. He set it down. He looked at the table for a long moment. "He pushed the bank," Thomas said. His voice was quiet and careful. "The debt he pushed them to call it early." "Yes," Anna said. "It wasn't—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together hard. "I made real mistakes," he said carefully. "The borrowing, the decisions, those were real." "Yes," she said. "They were." "But the end of it—" "The end of it was him," she said. "Not you." Thomas Calloway put his hands flat on the table and looked at them, the hands of a man who had worked hard and failed, and carried that failure like a stone for 3 years. And Anna saw something move through him that she could not entirely name. Not relief because the land coming back didn't undo the years. Not vindication because the mistakes he'd named were still real. Something more complicated than either of those things. Something that looked after a moment like the very tentative, very careful beginning of the possibility of standing up straight again. "Your young man," Thomas said finally, still looking at his hands. "He's outside," Anna said. "He did this." "We did it," Anna said. "Together." Her father nodded slowly. Then he looked up at her, and in his eyes was everything he had not known how to say in the barn in Red Hollow 3 weeks ago, the love that had always been there, and the failure that had covered it, and the long years of watching his daughter stand straight under a weight he had put on her. "Your mother," he said. "I know," Anna said. She reached across the table and covered his hands with hers briefly, and then stood and went back outside. Cole was at the fence with May, who appeared to be interrogating him about the upper trap line with the focused interest of a young woman who had been managing her family's problems alone for 3 weeks and had decided that competence was the most interesting quality a person could have. Cole was answering her questions with his usual directness and had apparently decided that May Calloway deserved the same serious engagement he gave everything else, which was going to serve May well in the years ahead. Anna stood by the horses and looked at Main Street. Ruth Garner was in front of the dry goods store. She caught Anna's eye across the distance and nodded once, a small nod, private and direct, the nod of a woman who knew she had been right about something and did not need to make a production of it. Anna nodded back. Buck Whitfield was outside his office further down the street. He saw her. He looked away first. She allowed herself for exactly 1 moment to feel the particular satisfaction of that. Then she turned back to Cole, who had finished answering May's questions and was looking at her with the quiet, settled attention of a man who knows where he is going and is simply waiting to go there. "Ready?" he said. She picked up her reins. She thought about the barn in Red Hollow, the heat, the line, the 7 men who had looked at her hands and made their calculations, and moved on. She thought about the weight of those 3 years, and what they had cost her, and what they had in the accounting that only becomes visible from a certain distance also built in her. She thought about the mountain which was waiting above the timberline with the same absolute indifference to human drama that it had always had and always would, demanding only what was real, returning exactly what was put in, keeping no record of failure and granting no advantage for sentiment. She thought about the word "us" said plainly in a government hearing room by a man who did not say things he didn't mean. She looked at Cole Maddox, who had walked across a room full of judgment and chosen her before the world gave him any reason to, and who had been right, not because the world had